Welcome, Buddhologists, to the introduction to Buddhism, this vast tradition that has spanned 2,500 plus years, crossing all of Asia, from India, Tibet, to China, to Japan, to Vietnam, Sri Lanka. We're going to study half the planet in this course. So I thought before we begin with this sort of brief introduction to our class, I thought I'd explain a bit who I am. I am the Reverend Dr. James Kenneth Powell, and I was raised, as we study religion, we know there's no real objective standpoint. There's fair and unfair and biased and bigoted or open-minded and yet critical. But there's no pure objective standpoint to study religion, so it's important to know my background, I think, briefly. And I was raised by a liberal Protestant minister, James Kenneth Powell, in fact, and that is me to the boy to the far left of that photo. And so for me, part of my quest for studying other religions, in particular Buddhism, was learning that my dad and I were going to burn in hell, according to many a fundamentalist neighbor and friend. And so I wanted to know, why is it that liberal Protestants or Catholics or Buddhists or Hindus are going to burn in hell? And as I studied these traditions of Asia, I realized that maybe they're not going to burn in hell, and that there are wonderful and terrible people all over the planet. That's not really that hard to accept or understand, I hope. And so I went to Northwestern University for my BA, and I had planned to become a lawyer, but then I just found religion too compelling, and I eventually bumped into Dr. Ishii Yamada, my BA advisor for Buddhist philosophy. From him, I learned a very different picture of Buddhism. It's not a pessimistic, world-denying escapism as many in the West think. And there, from him, I learned especially the Indian philosophical systems. Nevertheless, I felt some call to bring those new insights and awarenesses to the ministry. And so I went on to Cambridge University and studied theology, and there I studied with my advisor, Dr. Christopher Rowland, a liberation theologian about the New Testament, and learned there again, the Christian world is not what I thought it was either. So from there I went to the University of Chicago. My advisor was Dr. David Tracy. There I learned all the subtleties of hermeneutics, translating texts and relating them back into our culture, and then retranslating in a circular motion. And that's how religions evolve, essentially. After that, I became very curious. What do the Tibetan Buddhists think about Buddhism? And so I ended my educational career at the University of Wisconsin-Madison studying with Geshe Lungdup Zopa. There, I learned the biases that East Central Asian Buddhists, the Tantric types, have about the East Asian Buddhists. The East Asian Buddhists are too simple, and the Tibetan Buddhists feel they have mastered the philosophical systems of Buddhism and categorized them so perfectly that it is finished. So whether we opt for a simpler Chan or Pure Land East Asian Buddhism, or a very complex Tantric Central Asian Tibetan or Mongolian system, we'll find the great diversity of Buddhists around the world. And to some degree, I got the awareness of each of the northern sides, but also I spent my time with the conservative Theravadins, monks, and laypersons. And so I hope to bring you a relatively unbiased presentation of Buddhism. But we have to acknowledge, I was raised in Indiana by a liberal Protestant minister who, well, he didn't really care for Buddhism, but he was glad I had an open mind and was pleased to encourage me to critically explore new things, as I do you also. So, as far as a general layout of our course, we're going to start in India. Of course, a very good place to start, since that's where it all starts. We're going to see the cultural landscape and the religious landscape of India in the time the Buddha lived. We'll be examining the ascetic traditions of Jainism, and we can say the more positively thinking of desire, the religious traditions of Hinduism. I think without a fairly solid background in the Indian scene, it's going to be hard to understand what happens with Buddhism and its development and evolution in India. From there, we'll look at the life of the Buddha himself, of course, the reason for the season, we can say. We'll spend more than a little time on concepts like no self, Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, along with many other critical insights the Buddha shared that, in my mind, makes him the first scientific psychologist the planet has known, at least in history. After this, we'll see how Buddhism forms itself in India through the 18 schools and the disputes that arise, and also the emergence of the Mahayana form of Buddhism that will dominate the north from, again, Tibet to Japan and all places in between. We will look in particular at the Kushana Empire's Buddhism. That is the source of the dissemination of Buddhism primarily to China through the Silk Road. From there, we will watch Buddhism advance, if you will, into China and see its collision, as I like to think of it, with Taoism and Confucianism. And we'll look at those two traditions for one unit each too, because without understanding them, it's, I think, really difficult to understand East Asian Buddhism. Then we will move off to Central Asia, the final third wheel, they call it, the Vajrayana, the diamond vehicle, also known as Tantric Buddhism. And we're going to see the emergence of a Buddhism that is either an evolution from the old traditions or a devolution with its incorporation of worshiping deities, sexual intercourse, enlightenment, rituals, and all that will shock earlier Buddhists. And so what is going on in Central Asia? Then we leave, finally, for Buddhism in the West, and an end unit on Buddhism and science. And we'll see what you think about that in our final unit. So I encourage you to read the syllabus carefully, check out the course schedule, and each module. Many weeks you'll be asked to submit an essay to a discussion board and comment critically on at least 2 other students' essays. You'll also be taking a brief quiz and supplying audio-visual elements to slides for each unit. So you'll be asked to visualize Buddhism as we go through Asia, through its figures, objects, temples, rituals, and holidays, and then a prayer. During the first half of this course, I'll ask you to read a novel, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. It's a Westerner's view of Buddhism for sure, and that's kind of why I would like you to read that first, and before we examine the life and teachings of the historical Buddha. I'll ask you to basically write a critical reflection paper on this novel, and then final project will involve, well, writing a 4 to 6 page brief research paper by either going to a Buddhist place of worship and describing that in great detail, along with some scholarly information on the tradition to whose service you went, or a 4 to 6 page paper on any topic in Buddhism that you'd like to study, and turn either of those into a 4 to 6 minute documentary. Trust me, you're going to like these audio-visual pathways to learning with their hands-on big project. Studies have shown. So for this class, and really any online class, deadlines are critical. I fixed it so you can work ahead, but sadly you may not work behind, not without some penalties at any rate. So make all the deadlines that are clearly listed in the Dropbox and the like. I'm going to say maybe 3 to 5 hours a week, give or take, is what you're going to need for this class. And as far as grading goes, if you follow the assignments, rubric, and instructions carefully, and write detailed, organized, supported essays, then you're going to get an outstanding grade. And if you demonstrate what we call the basic awareness competencies in your essay, but without a great deal of detail, organization, reflection, and the like, you can count on a competent grade of C, and a B is solid, somewhere in between that. So all the best as we study this great and fabulous, enormously influential tradition of Buddhism. Whether we like Buddhism or not is not the question. It's that we must understand Buddhism to understand half the Eurasian continent and 2,500 years of Asian history and tradition. So I wish you the best of luck. Never hesitate to contact me at japowell@linfield.edu, and likewise jameskennethpowell@gmail.com, or you may even Facebook friend me if you like, really, and see what I really think off the record at James K. Powell on your Facebook search engines. So I like to be enormously available. Never hesitate with a question. You write me, and I will be glad to get right on it. So again, best of luck, and we'll be seeing you, well, for the next 16 weeks. You take care.